Hey everyone, welcome back to GenuX Consulting, where we do our Intrinsic Data Series. We're super happy to have you. Today we have Nick Miller, someone very special to me. He's also my nephew, and he is going to talk to us today about auditing. And I know most people, when they hear the word auditing, get a little like, oh, really nervous about it, or wonder what it's all about, or, think that you might be in trouble. But Nick is here to set us straight and tell us about what he does, how he does it, and what he uses data for in everyday activities that he does at work. So Nick, welcome. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm Nick Miller. I work as an auditor. So I started out my career, I went to school for finance at the University of Minnesota, and then came right out of school into a rotational program. So I worked in different accounting and finance related roles, and then moved into an audit position at the end of that. So I got to have all the on the ground accounting experience, and then move into an accounting role where I got to turn back and using what I knew, work in audit. So.
And so in that program, you got to do all those three things, and you just found that you liked the auditing specifically.
Yeah, audit or accounting can be interesting, but it can get really repetitive with monthly close and journal entries. What I really like about audit is it's always something new. So for better or for worse, it's always something new. You're going into areas and learning all about things. You're helping improve the business. So there's lots of variety in audit.
And is there a certain perspective that you get to gain from being on that side of the business and learning the business through this that you kind of want to, maybe explain? I think that, like I said, people don't really know what auditing is. They just hear that it's like this thing that someone does, right? So you went in finance, and then you did accounting, and then you did the audits. So like, why the audits? What was interesting about that? How was it different on a perspective side of the business? And how did you find that more interesting than the other that you were doing?
Yeah, so audit, there's a couple different kinds of audit. The audit that I've done has been internal audit. So we're in-house within a company. There's the external auditors. So that's like PwC and all the big four firms. They do a lot of like financial auditing and auditing your financial statements. So I've really done a lot of operational auditing. So what that means is the audit committee or a certain level of management in the business wants us to come in and look at a certain area. They might want us to look there just because they have concerns, like specific concerns, or they just might want to know, you don't know what you don't know. So they might want us just to take a look. When auditors go in, we start out by walking through the process with everyone. So we get to learn how the day-to-day works, how that frontline worker is working with everything. And then audit's really looking there to see where are the risky areas within those processes. And is there anything in place to control those risks?
Like risk mitigation as well. Like you're looking at something like that. So
yeah.
just to ask you a clarifying question, when you start talking to people about their roles and what they're doing, what is their first response to you when you're like auditing them and they're like, yeah, okay. Like what is that like on your end?
Yeah, I would say most people have a negative perception of audit. I've had someone, say that we're the police coming in, so people can be a little nervous at the start. People who've had experience with their internal audit departments usually are a little better. They know that, we're there to be a partner and to drive improvements. Less there to get everybody fired and, find lots of problems. That's not our goal.
So when you say process improvements, like when you're going into audit something, like let's go down that road. Like what is it that the goal of the business actually is? Because I think people think like when you're going into audit, they're like, you're trying to get them in trouble. But from your perspective, and you're being told we need to audit this thing, and you said there's process improvements, what does that look like from your end of it?
Yeah, so, people have their everyday job that they're working on all the time. And a lot of times they just don't have the time to look and say, hey, how could we fix this process to make it run smoother? Are there other tools that we could use? People are swamped all the time. So if they had extra time to fill, they're generally given stuff to fill that. So that's a benefit of audit coming in. So, I've seen processes all across different companies, seen different areas, lots of different tools and ways of mitigating risk or approaching ways to accomplish things. And so audit can bring in and say, hey, maybe somebody's dealing with a lot of paperwork and they don't have the time to go and redesign their process to fix it, or they haven't thought about it. And so audit could come in and say, and maybe audit finds an issue with their paper processing and points to that as like a key area of risk. Audit could say, hey, Bob over in the other part of the company has this really cool tool using AI, and he's able to process all this stuff, cut out a bunch of work, cut out a bunch of mistakes. And so you're able to say, maybe as the action plan item would be go talk to Bob, see how that's improved, and then, work to implement that in your area of the company.
So it sounds like auditing is really looking for efficiencies or inefficiencies with the company and tries to make it more streamlined overall, is what it really sounds like you're saying to us, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of process improvement. I mean, some of it is, maybe there's an area of concern, like we've had a lot of shrink, which is another word for like theft, an area. So maybe audit's called in to take a look there and see, is there some gaps in their receiving process or their shipping process where things are falling off the truck. So there can be targeted things, and sometimes it's just take a look at this area we haven't looked at in a while, and maybe there's some things we can improve on. So there's definitely different reasons for doing an audit.
I think that most people think when they hear the word audit, they're thinking like shrink. They're not necessarily thinking of efficiencies. So, I mean, I think we should blow that little misnomer out of the water here. That's not how it really works. That's not what the intention is of an auditor, right? So and you're hearing it from the auditor, right? So, so now that we're talking a little bit about like how it works, you're looking for efficiencies. How do you do that mathematically? I mean, because your background's in finance, so you're definitely and accounting. Didn't you go to a specific school in Minnesota? It's like a specific business school, right?
Yeah, I went to the Carlson School of Management.
Okay. So that's like a really good management school.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, like I said, you were very heavy into more of the finance, more of the numbers, and you ended up in auditing. How do you use data? What kind of data do you, collect, and how does that influence your decisions?
Yeah, so there's a lot of operational data involved in just the day-to-day running of a business. So, there's obvious things like inventory counts, inventory numbers, moving products in and out. There's data around invoices. There's all kinds of quality factors and things like that. So yeah, audit really uses a lot of data, and it's really good when you find a problem to contextualize the problem. So if you find a couple invoices that are messed up, you can take that to a CEO or CFO and say, hey, we found a couple things. But what they're going to ask next is, how widespread of an issue is this? So if you have a big data set with all the invoices and you're able to tell them, over the last year, you had X invoices that had this much of a dollar amount and it affected this many locations, and here's the exact percentage of what the issue is, that's going to drive process improvements a lot more than just saying, we found a couple problems. So data really, really helps to support those actions.
And so when you collect data, what kind of, like when you say like big databases, like what's in those databases? Is it just information about this is how many invoices we're doing per day? This is what those invoices are taking in. Give us a scenario. So like you're looking into X, here's how you find the equation to figure out what's going on with X, and here's the results with Y. So how does it walk me through the process basically?
Sure. If you had let's say we were looking at a warehouse and we were looking at their invoices, they're shipping things out. So, maybe that we were called in to look at it because this specific warehouse has a lot of shrink compared to other warehouses, and they want to know what the problem is. So your invoices are going to be held in some kind of centralized system, hopefully. Businesses use all kinds of different ERP systems to track that kind of stuff. But those invoices are going to have everything from the date of the invoice, the products involved, the dollar amount, all that sort of stuff. It should have something about the approval, who signed off on the invoices, what customer is it going to, all that sort of thing. So as you're looking through the process, maybe we're doing a walkthrough and we find out that, nobody has to sign off on the invoice or the purchase order before the product goes out the door. Well, that could be a big problem because maybe you're shipping stuff out and people aren't double checking what's in the packages, and it's not matching the invoice. So that would be an area of a gap. Audit would say, put a step in there where somebody signs off on it.
Right.
And then we've mitigated the risk, hopefully.
And so then you find that out through like you said, the document control system that you're using to send out the invoices. And so then you're tracing the invoices through that system. You're looking for potentials that like seem odd, right? So something seems off with this like invoice. Why does it, this thing looks like this and the other ones look different, right?
Yep. And to support that, what we would do is you do your walkthroughs and then you do your testing. So when you're doing testing, you can do random sampling. Like the warehouse had 1,000 invoices, we're going to pick 25, and you can find stuff that way. But a really great way to do it is to do full population. So you take all 1,000, you put them in a spreadsheet, you look at every invoice, and then maybe you see that 20 of them are just weird looking. The dates seem off, or maybe you just have some that are super high dollar amounts, and so you focus on those. So that allows you to target your selections at the things that actually matter. If $5 of stuff is being stolen, CFO or CEO is not going to care. That's part of the cost of doing business. But if your $1 million invoices are having issues, that's cause for concern.
So what's interesting about what you said is how you would put it on a spreadsheet and how you would look at it. And so sometimes you said you would do a random sampling. And I know a lot of different businesses do random sampling for quality control. Like, let's talk about chocolate. You have to randomly sample your samples to make sure that they taste in the way that they're supposed to, and that they're being packaged the way that they're supposed to. I'm sure Hershey's does this. So that's like a random sample where they'll look at 1,000 different boxes of like dark chocolate, and you have to do a sampling test. Like, you have to make sure that out of all of those, it's like the same flavor, the same texture. Like, I know people do this, right? So it sounds like it's really similar to auditing. But what really was interesting is when you started to talk about spreadsheets and you're looking for kind of a needle in the haystack, right? You're looking for something that just doesn't look right out of 1,000. We're using the number of 1,000, right? In 1,000 different invoices. And you're like, what sets you off? Like, what do you think is like the intrinsic nature of like what you might notice in something like that? I know you said something seemed off about it, but what would that be? Can you articulate that? Or is it just like this gut instinct that you're like used to?
Yeah, it really depends on what you're looking at. So if you're looking at, I don't know, let's say you had a bunch of vending machines or something, and you had a standard price. Every invoice is $5 or something. A $10 invoice is going to stick out. If you have, like in Hershey's, if you have a product like that, you might have quality factors that apply to each case. I don't know what quality factors they use for chocolate. Is the cocoa content, way off on this shipment? Well, we're going to want to look at that one. Why is it screwed up? So it really depends on what it is. But yeah, targeted sampling is really a great way to get at the issue and find the problems. You don't really want to. It kind of sucks when you get through 25 samples and you found absolutely nothing. It either means they're doing everything perfect or you didn't find it. So you can take that whichever way depending on what kind of auditor you are, you can take it as a great sign, or you can take it as we need to dig deeper. But
okay, cool. So let's say I'm just kind of like interested in how like you transmit this information, right? So you have Bob who works in shipping, and he is shipping out, let's just say paper. I've been watching a lot of The Office, so let's just go with paper, or copiers or whatever they're shipping out. And you've noticed something. How do you, and this is something obviously that's coming from not you to explore. This is an assignment that you've been given at the level that you work. So like, how do you message this up to your bosses, and how do you I've worked in corporate, so I will say this as politely as I possibly can, but nobody wants to get anybody in trouble if they're not doing something wrong. But these sometimes can be sensitive issues. So how do you guys look at it? Is it just like a numbers thing? How do you message it up? How do you tell, what is your line of communication once you say you do find something that is either inefficient or you do find shrinkage? Let's go with inefficient instead of shrinkage. Let's do that.
Yeah. So if you found something, if it's just a one-off thing, typically you continue your testing until, you have a little more evidence. And then you do have to run things by the business. There might be a reason that, the invoice was missing a sign-off. Maybe for whatever reason that's not required on that one. So audit, obviously doesn't know everything. We've come in just trying to learn things really quick, so we're probably missing things. My first assumption is usually that, I'm looking at something wrong, unless something's really wrong. So go and check with the business. I would check with, notify my boss and everyone first, make sure that it's not something that they've seen before. A lot of issues are common across different things. But then you would take it to those on the ground people, try to get some context. If they think it's an issue, then you're going to want to put things together And usually throughout the audit, we're having check-ins with the business partners. So everyone from that higher level down to middle management and even the lowest level. So everybody should be on the same page the whole way through. You really don't want to get to like an audit close and show up your findings and everybody's surprised and upset and not understanding why there's a problem. So yeah, constant communication is really key to preventing blow-ups or people being upset. So, but they can justify things on the business level, but sometimes, audit does have to stand their ground and say, no, this is really an issue. So, and that's where the benefit of audit being independent and reporting directly up to the board outside of that management structure, that gives us that the authority to push on some things.
I didn't know that. Explain how that works. So if someone else is interested in auditing and they understand how that works in a business.
Yeah, so the internal audit department typically reports up through like a chief audit executive, so like a CFO in a finance organization, but it's just the C-suite level. And then they report to the audit committee of the board of directors. So there's a subset of the board of directors that's the audit committee. Our chief audit executive will present the findings, present ongoing things. He'll work with them to set like what the priorities should be for the year, what areas they think is risky, what, from talking, the board has a lot of insight into the business. So that's really where the direction comes from. And then we sit outside of, administratively, I think we go up through like a finance side of things, but ultimately report straight to the board. So we're able to keep independent that way.
That's really cool. I had no idea that was a totally different, like, I want to say, not umbrella situation, but like a pillar, and how the business unit would directly lead to the board of directors. I did not know that. Is that normal in all of auditing throughout large corporations? I mean, you probably know better than.
Yeah, I think it might be required as part of, I don't remember what the laws are, but I think it's pretty standard, yeah, in large companies to go straight through the board of directors. So, and smaller companies may not have an audit department. So
I don't.
Yeah.
It hasn't started yet, but I'll definitely like pull you in even when I do, because there's going to be so much shrinkage. I'm going to backtrack. So once you get the data and you've messaged it up to your boss, and then like that gets elevated or escalated, should it be something that needs to be talked about. What kind of reports do you write? Do you just do normal documentation? Do you guys do slideshows? Do you include all the data? Because data, numbers don't lie, right? And it's really hard to argue with something that's just, quantified. So how does that usually work with, like, I know we said that everybody be on the same page and that you're going through a process and everybody understands the process, but like when I worked at corporate, there was a flow to everything that we did. Like first we did the testing, like you do. Then we had the report, and then we talked to the team about the report, the immediate team, and then that would be messaged up maybe or maybe not. So like, is it a similar flow to how actual research works, or is it different because of the different potential concerns that auditing brings up within corporations or people?
Yeah, there's a pretty standard flow. So yeah, you have the planning, field work where all the testing is happening. Then you have reporting. So yeah, we put together an audit report. We have all of our own files, so work papers with all like the populations and the really in the depth data. So we don't generally share that out everywhere. But in the audit report usually gets fairly specific. So, we found 47 of 1,000 licenses had this issue of this dollar impact at these locations. So it gets pretty specific. You're writing those audit reports for the C-suite and executive level generally. So there's a balance on some executives love lots of detail and some just want to get the highlights right away. So you do have to balance that. But I would say in general, you can look over it really quick and you can see the issues. And if you want more detail, the detail is definitely there. So, and those reports have everything from, what we found, the impact that that's going to have, or it could have on the business, and then the recommendations of audit, and then what we've agreed with the business that they're going to actually do. And so then audit will eventually follow up to make sure they've actually done the things that they've promised to do in that report.
That was my next question. So after you report this out, and which I'm glad you went to anyway. So like you report this out, there's a consensus, there's a decision made, and then the team is responsible for implementing, or do you give them the example of how to implement the thing, or did they come up with their own way of implementing it? And then when you come back and check, because I'm sure you've done that a couple times now, is that check usually successful, or is it met with another like, whoa, check, or how does that whole process work?
Yeah, so action plans are usually, I mean, audit will have a recommendation. A lot of times they're fairly clear, like what they need to put into place, but audit will have a recommendation. And then we work with the business to come up with an action plan. I mean, ultimately, it's up to the business to implement these things. Audit, because we're independent, we can't go in and put the controls into place. So the business really has to be involved in creating those action plans in terms of knowing what they have the resources for, what's actually reasonable. They're the ones managing the risk day to day. So it's ultimately up to them, but audit has a viewpoint on things. And then yeah, once those are agreed to, there's usually due dates on when they should be done. And then audit will follow up later. So it really depends on the action plan, um, whether or not they're done on time. I would say, generally give a generous due date because people when they find an issue, it's a big deal and we want to address it right away. But as with anything, you kind of get used to knowing that that's there, and then it can fall by the wayside as people have regular day-to-day jobs to be working on. So, there's processes to get extensions. Usually that involves, getting the consent of like higher ups and C-suite level, just so they're aware that the risk hasn't been mitigated yet. But yeah, it really depends. Some actions are really easy to do, and some of them are long-term difficult things to accomplish. So
So things have like different like I want to say milestones to accomplish the goal that they need. Have you ever gone in? I know you've only been doing this a handful of years, but have you ever gone in and like there was a plan put in place and you go back to audit to do your due diligence and then find that the plan that was put in place was never like actually put in place and that the original findings stood the same. Have you seen something like that happen?
yeah, I've seen scenarios where that does happen. I can't go into specifics, but yeah, there's times where sometimes they've put the control in place and maybe they haven't done it, totally 100% the right way, or that we've missed an area in the original. Um, but yeah, I would say typically they're good right away, but there are times where you go back and things haven't been fixed. So then they need to continue to follow up.
Do you think that's because there's just like a resistance to change, or it's a really big corporation and everybody has their, like you said, people are just busy? But
Yeah, yeah, I think it's a mix of people are busy and a lot of times it's resources. People only have so much time to go in and do things, and changing processes or writing policies, doing things like that take a lot of time. So yeah, I would say resources are the number one thing you run into, which is probably most problems in business. So
fair. So now I've got a Burger King question, kind of like if it was your way. Well, I don't even know if you know the Burger King question, but Burger King used to have commercials that say "Have it your way." Like you could order what you want at Burger King. So if this is Burger King and you could have it your way, kind of question. So I know you really enjoy this type of work. You've gone from one company now to another company doing the same type of work. So what makes you excited about this work? What like sets you on fire every day to get up? Because I know you really like doing this. Like you get up and you're like, I'm excited about my job. I'm going to go and do this. Like if you were telling someone who might be interested in audits, like what would you say to them?
yeah, I really like that we're driving real results and making process improvements. Going and finding an issue is one thing, but then actually figuring out a solution and then working with the team to see that that solution gets put into place is what really, I mean, I don't love to find things wrong and, get people in trouble. That's not my personality at all. So to find something wrong and then work with people to solve it is really, that's what gets me out of bed in the morning. It makes me really excited. When I told my other accounting colleagues that I was going into audit, at the end of my rotations, they were all, you're going over to the dark side, you're going to the police, it's not going to be any fun. You're just going to be, looking at paperwork, but that's not been my experience. There is some detail work and you have to have that eye for small things, but yeah, no, it's been really, really exciting to learn about all these different areas and improvements.
Yeah, because you get to learn about a couple of like different environments within a business. Like you're not just
Yeah.
beholden to like one business unit and that's where you stay. So I think that that's really interesting too. It was one of the things that I enjoyed when I worked in one of the companies I worked for is that for whatever reason they had me working across multiple business units. And that wasn't normal. Like don't get me wrong, that wasn't normal, but I just kind of ended up in that space and I always found it really interesting because I always felt that my job was kind of like evolving because you were dealing with different circumstances all the time and you had to like pivot. So now I'm going to ask the Burger King question because I didn't get there. I just explained what it was. So if you could have it your way, Nick, like where do you see yourself going with this? Like where do you want to be and what does that look like for you? If you could make it anything that you wanted.
Yeah, that is a really good question. I think someday I'd probably like to get back to more of a finance type of role. I really, really enjoy audit. Really enjoy the challenge or the challenges and the variety that come with it. And I think there are finance roles where you can kind of mix that the learning new things and that audit has along with a finance type view. I've always liked the parts of my job where I get to take a higher level view of things. So, I mean, it's really good to know the accounting and to be in the details, but it's really, really nice to be up above the details and kind of see how everything is working. So, I don't know what that role looks like specifically, but I know there are roles out there like that.
Well, that's awesome. And I hope one day, like, that's where you end up because that's what you want to do right now. I mean, that changes. We think we know what we want to do when we grow up, and then, like, you end up not being a fashion designer and being a scientist. So I don't know what to tell you, but I like where you're going.
Didn't think I would end up as an auditor, so
No, I know. It's like you never know where life is going to take you. It's just kind of like if you're open and you're willing to pivot and you're willing to be malleable, you don't even know what you're going to find. So this is what it is to be an auditor in a large corporation. We're not telling you where Nick works because hush, hush, we're not allowed. But this is what auditing actually is. There's a lot of data involved. There's a lot of random sampling. There's a lot of communication and there's a lot of messaging up. It's not what I thought it was supposed to be because when he told me he was going into auditing, the first thing I thought was, why are you going into auditing? You're going to have to tell on people that you like. And that's not at all what it is. So no more stigma about auditing. And there's a lot of different types of data that you use to, find and solve problems. So I think that's really cool. So Nick, thank you so much for coming on. If there's anything you want to share about yourself, if you're in like doing anything fun, like running, doing a marathon, any place where someone you might know from college who wants to ask you questions, how can they find you, this kind of stuff, like this is your moment to share that with us and any of the audience.
Sure, yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. But yeah, no, I'm not signed up for a marathon right now. I'm trying to get back into it and get committed here. I need to sign up for something though, because that's what really motivates me to actually run. So, but yeah, thanks so much for having me.